In the hour and the presence of a quorum, I call the Acton-Boxborough Regional School Committee to order. Members of the public who wish to watch the meeting online may use ActonTV's YouTube channel found at the top of the agenda. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on ActonTV's website at actontv.org. I have no chairwoman's remarks this evening, just to say thank y'all for coming out on a Tuesday. Thank y'all for 2 months in a row of 3 meetings. I am happy to share with you, we will only have 2 this month. So thank you for all of the time that you've given and for the time that you will continue to give. We will now accept an update from our 3 student reps for this year. They will be reporting at the first school committee meeting each month and will share some student perspective on current events at the high school. This is per our policy JIB, student involvement in decision making.
Today, there's 2 of us.
Yes, brilliant.
Yes.
Would you just introduce yourself to all of us, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
My name is Harshini Magesh, and I'm a school committee rep. So today, I'd like to address the need for more gender-neutral bathrooms at the high school. Currently around school, there are 3 gender-neutral bathrooms, but therefore, students who don't feel very comfortable or safe using the restrooms allocated for girls and boys specifically are left with limited options. And I've also heard from many of my friends and classmates that teachers often tend to use these gender-neutral restrooms as alternatives for staff bathrooms. And this causes such students who may be, for example, part of the transgender or gender non-conforming community or persons with disabilities to have to wait for extended periods of time and or travel long distances to gain access to these restrooms. So thus I feel that it's necessary to implement more gender-neutral restrooms within the high school to foster a more inclusive community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I also talked about that at the end of last year. I mentioned that too, so I agree with everything she's saying.
Do you kindly introduce yourself?
Yes,
So we know
I'm
who you are.
Molly Norris. I'm a sophomore. Today I'm going to be talking about the crowded hallways and our school's dust problem, but I'll also be discussing a positive change that I've noticed since beginning the school year. To start off, I'd like to give my own opinions about the crowded hallways. Every day when I'm trying to get to my classes, I find myself at a standstill in the hallways, especially surrounding doorways and staircase entrances. An anonymous student said, "People stop in the hallways to talk. They'll walk 4 across, they'll walk down the middle of the hallways where people are usually using that room to pass. They'll walk super slow." Due to this, when you have a class in Upper East and your next class is in Lower West, it makes it very difficult to get to class on time because of how crowded and busy the hallways are. If you are unfamiliar with the layout of the school, Upper East and Lower West are pretty far apart, especially when you only get a 5-minute passing period. The problem isn't how crowded the school is, the problem is people's attitudes in the hallways. To get to class, sometimes you are forced to push past people who have decided to stop in the middle of the hallway randomly to talk to a friend they saw. Although we should be encouraging socializing, we also need to keep in mind that others have a class far away to get to in the same passing time these people who are stopping in the hallways have. Another issue in the hallways is the roughhousing. Rika Schneider said, "People run or mess around in the hallways, which poses a hazard to people walking and poses traffic." I can attest to this. I often see people shoving others against lockers in the hallways or running to chase their friends and grab them. As I said before, we do recognize that it is important to have social time in school. However, when this social time starts affecting the ability of other students to stay safe in the school and get to their classes on time, it's something that needs to be changed. On a different note, I've heard from multiple students that our school has a dust problem. A student named Rai said, "The school is very dusty and it bothers my allergies." Another student, Rika Schneider from earlier, also shared their thoughts. Dust in the school is affecting people's ability to learn because it's triggering their allergies, causing irritation during class. I know it's hard to keep a school completely clean, especially a school like AB, but I believe that we should have some sort of way to keep the dust levels to a minimum. This would positively impact the school, and I think it would be a good idea and investment in the long run. Amidst these problems, there are also many things going right. As one of my friends mentioned to me, it's nice to be able to see everyone gathering in groups and being able to hug each other again. Because of COVID, the last few years have required us to be very distant from each other. It's a good feeling when you see people getting back into their old rhythms now, being able to hang out and be close to each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Any questions for our student committee members or comments? All right, very good. Thank you. All right, here we go. We're here for public participation. Per school committee policy BEDH, members of the public are invited to speak for up to 3 minutes regarding items that are not on the agenda. For items on the agenda, the public is asked to please wait for that item. The committee does not typically respond to comments during public participation. Mr. Ballard.
Thank you. Oh, wonderful. Good evening. Steve Ballard from Boxborough. I want to continue my last 3-minute comment from the last meeting, not sure joint meeting, but the last open public meeting that we had here. And just to continue, there are a lot of questions. I will send them to you, committee members, but I just wanted to help you to think about the stuff that you're going to talk about in December again. And I want to say again, what Tessa said was absolutely true when she said, you know, let's wait till we hear the whole story, because we didn't hear it at that meeting. But she herself and 2 other members, one of whom is here and one of whom is not, very smart members of this committee, and all with well-intentioned actions that I've seen, including Tessa, did not wait to thank the administration for making them feel safe or with their kids at the school. And so when you don't understand another member who's not here's anger about that, maybe it would help to see the reality that we all know, okay? Hindsight is 20/20, but Mr. Light did his best, I'm sure, and I'm sure other people in the administration did, but they did not make the school safer. It made it more dangerous, because now we know there were no guns in the school, except for the 6 or 7 or 8 Glocks that went in with the police that the first media report of showed. They stormed in there. They were all 6, 7 cruisers in front of the circle, the high school, went in to do a search, okay, 2-hour lockdown. And then now we know these students didn't know student had a gun. And we've heard about searches, okay, searches. Apparently there was a search of the school. I'm assuming it was a blanket a locker search, but we don't know, but we were told. And there were searches of the students, we were told, and we don't know what those entailed, except that they were in a room. They were taken out of the classrooms. Now, why wouldn't, if you had reasonable suspicion that there were 6 students that might have a gun, probably don't, because yesterday we determined that the police said it's not really a problem.
1 minute.
Why would you not say, instead of calling those 6 black men out of their rooms and isolating them and questioning them without their parents there, why wouldn't you instead say, okay, kids coming to school, there are a couple of places where they might have a gun. Locker, room. So why wouldn't you go to the 6 rooms or 5 rooms or however many rooms there were with the administrators and say, stand up everybody, let's go to the cafeteria. All of them, nope, leave all your stuff here. Go out, and then cops come around the wall, you know, go in and search the rooms, okay? And then you're not singling out these black men that you already have an idea that they probably don't have a gun. Single them out. Everybody knows who they are now. Instead, and then why you have a question from the administration that they can't answer because of one person, supposed privacy issues. It sounds like the person, one of 3 white people who are on the press.
Thank you, Steve.
That we know. What about the privacy interests of these black men? Thank you.
Are there any other members of the audience who would like to do public participation and address this committee? Hello, Molly.
Sorry, I'd just like to comment again on that comment. I looked up after that situation the statistics in AB of Black students, and I found out that it was, I'm not sure if these are completely updated, they might be from a few years ago, but it said there were around 3.7% Black students, and when I did the math, that means there are around 30-something Black students in the school, and when 6 Black boys are getting pulled out of their classes and accused in an anonymous bullying report system of having a gun, I think it is important because it is a risk and it's something they have to look at. But I also think when they sent the email out to the students afterwards, they said they were going to consider if there was any racial profiling involved. And I think it was very clear there was racial profiling involved. And I know my mom is a school administrator, and I know how hard it is to get these things right and make everybody happy and just make sure that it's all going well. And I know how hard it is to keep everybody safe. But I think the wording in that email and some of the opinions and reactions of the staff and administrators was not the best way to handle the situation.
Thank you, Molly. I'm going to make space if anybody has any other comments, and then I'll move on to Superintendent's update. Very good. Mr. Superintendent.
All right. Thank you, Kyra. So first, I want to say I'm excited to welcome some of our staff in a few minutes to do a little presentation on some of the work we're doing around culturally responsive schools. I want to just update you on a few different things. First, I want to congratulate one of our high school coaches, Bill Kane, who is the MIAA Coach of the Year for gymnastics. We just received that, and I'll just read a little bit. This was in recognition based on excellence of character, impact upon students and community, and coaching credentials. So congratulations to Bill. Very, very pleased. I also just want to point out, if you read the Boston Globe recently, there was a wonderful write-up on our girls' soccer team and some of the students involved in that. So if you haven't gotten a chance to read it, I would highly encourage you to take a look. We just received in the mail a proclamation from Senator Eldridge through the Senate congratulating us on the opening of the new school. So thank you, Senator Eldridge, as well as leadership in the Senate. And then finally, just a very quick update. If you're headed to the MASC conference, you may see some familiar faces. We have a panel presenting around the work around culturally responsive schools, and in particular some of our partnership with the Leadership Academy out of New York to continue to develop that, and around the efforts this year to think about expanding teacher leadership in that area and giving more voice to our faculty. And then additionally, we are also participating as a district on a panel on green buildings. So I know Kyra's presenting on our panel around culturally responsive schools. Adam's participating in the panel on green building initiatives in the state. So, thank you both, and we look forward to seeing you if you're headed there.
Questions about that? Because we're on time, we can keep it moving. All right, so then, Peter, are you going to introduce our guests?
I'm going to do the initial introduction of our Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning, Deb Bookus, and our Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Jennifer Faber. They have done a wonderful job of preparing this presentation for you. I'm going to let them do some more introductions of everyone who's going to be speaking, because we're going to do this just like a few weeks ago when we did social emotional learning. We're going to do this in some smaller chunks so that you have an opportunity to ask a few questions in between. We do have a number of items, so as you think about questions, we just want you to be wary of timing and the agenda as well.
Good evening, y'all. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you. As Peter introduced, I am Jennifer Faber. I am the director. Do you want me to come closer? I could be real loud if you need me to. I am Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and I did start in July, so I am a new face to many of you. And tonight, we're here on behalf of all the educators, and we'd like to thank you for this time and space to be able to share and highlight the work that's happening here at AB. So for tonight's presentation, you can see up above, we have our agenda. And these are the talking points that we want to highlight the work. We have district strategy, SEED, CRTL, Curriculum, and Welcome Center. All of these will be presented by some of our educators and myself as well. And after each section, just so you know, we will have some time for questions as well as at the end, because we do have a lot of moving parts that are happening here for each section, so we want to make sure that we allow for time for any questions or comments that you might have. So thank you.
So I'll start off with sharing our district strategy. You've seen this slide before. I want to call your attention, though, to the lower left portion of the diagram, where we talk about culturally responsive and inclusive professional learning and culturally responsive curriculum, instructional practices, and materials. And so this is going to be the area of focus for us this evening around our district strategy. I also want to call your attention to the square on the bottom right-hand side. For this year, we will be able to gather some baseline data around this work. We will be conducting 2 surveys for all of our students, our staff, and our families, focused on belonging and relationships and school and district climate and culture. So that'll give us a sense of our starting point. The framework that we're using is the one by the Leadership Academy. It's a portrait of a culturally responsive school system, and within that there are rubrics and frameworks for superintendents and principals in 8 different practice areas, from everything from self-work to looking at our core values, to adult learning, and to community care and engagement. The frameworks also include some indicators so we can gauge our work, again, starting with that baseline foundation and then moving forward.
So our next section is going to be focused on SEED, and SEED is Seeking Educational Equity and Diversity, and we have 2 presenters who are current SEED leaders. We have Maureen Lynn and Ravindran, who are hopefully walking up to present the next section.
Welcome, y'all.
Thank you. I'm Ravindran. I teach social studies at the high school, and I'm also a SEED facilitator. So Maureen and I are here to talk about SEED. So SEED was founded in 1987 at Wellesley College by Dr. Peggy McIntosh. She's probably the most well-known for a really popular article that students read in graduate school called Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, and it's about white racial privilege. And SEED essentially started with the belief that teachers learn best from other teachers, particularly the peers that they work with. So we become facilitators in SEED programming, and we do a lot of fashioning our own curriculum. So we go to New Leaders Week and we learn all about what SEED is about, and then we create curriculum based on what we've learned from SEED, and we continue to develop that curriculum as time goes on. And the purpose of SEED really is to encourage teachers to learn from each other's experiences, specifically related to inequity in terms of race, gender, class, and then other systems of oppression and privilege.
I am Maureen Lynn. I'm the special ed coordinator at the junior high. Back in 2017, I was one of the first AB educators to go to SEED New Leaders Week and be able to come back and provide seminars for our district and our community. We now have 15 SEED leaders throughout the district who are able to offer seminars. We have 2 going in the fall, we have 2 planned for the spring, and we have some also planned for the summer. A common misperception is that SEED is a training. That's not a word that I like when we talk about SEED, because I think with equity work you can never be trained. It's more of a beginning of the journey and learning all that you need to continue to learn and understand to do work. SEED leaders guide colleagues in experiential, interactive exercises and conversations, and really try to cultivate spaces for self-learning and peer sharing to create more inclusive learning spaces and communities. One of my favorite parts about it is that it's district-wide PD. So in the seminar I'm leading right now, we have preschool educators all the way through up to high school educators. And it really creates a great way to build community and work on common goals. I think it also helps us to think about the needs of kids and families in a holistic way, which is a unique aspect of this PD.
So one of the great things about SEED, I think, and this is something I learned going through New Leaders Week and then also learned having taught 3 sections of SEED already, is that it really creates an enormous transformative change for a lot of teachers. I get emails all the time about how differently they see the curriculum that they perhaps have been teaching for 10 or 15 years in ways that they hadn't looked at it before, because SEED provides this alternative lens. And so I think that can be a really powerful change for a lot of teachers, new teachers and older teachers, to be able to shift the focus and the filter of how they see education, how they see their practice in the classroom. And then the other thing I think it does too, it is also really asks us to look at our curriculum deeply, particularly if we've been doing that curriculum for a long time, how we deliver that curriculum, what types of materials and resources we use, from where those resources and materials come from, and then change the way that we interact with our students, the ways in which we create curriculum and create pedagogy and practices within the classroom.
I think also having a number of people go through SEED allows for us to be able to find conversation partners in our buildings. Last week I had 3 people come to my office because a student had made an insensitive comment. And each one of these educators is completely capable of coming up with a thoughtful response, but it struck me the power of being able to find people to say, can I just run this by you? Can we talk about this? And so we're seeing a lot of people do that. It helps you to kind of identify who are the champions for equity work and for advocating for kids and families. We like to think that SEED is having an impact. I know that a lot of school-based work is happening, some of which you'll hear about later. I can point to one example from the junior high. Molly Wong, who you'll hear from later, is a librarian at the junior high, and she and I have teamed up to create a gray block class for students that we're calling Perspectives. And so we're allowing students to have access to some of these interactive activities as a way to keep spreading the work and the learning. Does anybody have any questions about SEED work?
Questions? Some of us have been through this training, so I'm sorry. Some of us have been through
Very common.
the introduction to SEED.
Yes.
Any committee members?
Yes, I have questions. Yeah, I used to have my office in Wellesley. I just know some things about that Wellesley Center. Sorry, Steve. Center for Women, and the 1987, the year I graduated from college, 87, that's when this article was written by the founder of SEED, who is the embodiment of white privilege, and she used that term, white privilege, first, I think, and made it part of her vernacular. But, she has 3 degrees from Harvard and 1 from Cambridge or Oxford, whatever. And she's been there as a first-generation feminist, and now we have second and third generation white teachers all over the place who are learning from this top-down hierarchical authoritarian teaching system, which is what I see is a problem with SEEDS, with UDL, and all the stuff that's on here, pretty much. I'm a progressive democratic socialist, and I see, okay, it's great that she recognized that she was privileged and that she's in Wellesley and talking about it. But my parents are 86. She's 87 years old. She's teaching lots of white women, 6 out of 7 of us, the teachers here, are white women, okay? 1 out of 7 are men. We have people of color, they're at the bottom, okay? They're the teachers. So we're gonna spend a couple of years training people my age who look like me, but they're women, to teach the 20 and 30-year-olds, the only ones who are teachers of color mostly, or the ones who also are more hip to stuff that 87 years old are.
Steve.
So I don't understand, why we have this top-down thing. We have a nice horizontal equity with classes that are not authoritarian structured now, with all this stuff, but we have a hierarchical structure. We're going to teach people to teach people. The most privileged to teach the other privileged people to teach to trickle down. Why? Why is this good?
I guess I would argue that even in SEED training, much of that training is in fact done by many individuals of color of a variety of different ages. And the experience is not one where the facilitators direct everybody to think or believe certain things. It is very much an experience where we're sharing information, we're sharing content, and we're asking people to think deeply about that. It is not, I think, as Maureen pointed out, it is not a training where we're asking people to think a certain way. It is very much about engaging individuals to think deeply about systems of privilege that exist. And I would say the SEED sessions that I attended were some of the most diverse sessions in education I've ever been a part of. So I argue that there is quite a lot of diversity in SEED in 2022.
Thank you. Yeah, go for it.
No, I think, Steve, just to your point, I think one of the other things that it's easy to discount sometimes in equity work that there's actually a specific body of knowledge and skill set required to do work well. I think, to discount that lessens that type of work in comparison to some other academics. And I think of, take music, for example. There's a skill set that people develop over the course of their lives through the study of music. And if we want someone to be an effective music teacher, we expect them to develop skills before we put them in front of students in a classroom. And similarly, our mathematics teachers go through years of training to be able to teach mathematics well. If we want our teachers to understand strong principles of culturally responsive schools and examining their own bias, there's a skill set that they want to develop. And so there is that point of reflection and, bringing people together to do this work. So I just think, we don't want to discount that there's a skill needed to be able to do the work well.
Thank you.
I want to be really clear.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Hi, Tessa.
Hi, Maureen, you mentioned that there's some work at the junior high where you're hoping to put together a class that sort of teaches some of these principles to those junior high students. And I'm just curious because I heard some really not positive feedback about my child's experience on Halloween and some slurs that were thrown around and things like that. And I just wonder, are we still participating in the ADL program at the high school? And my follow-up question to that is there a hope to kind of bring this to the general population of the high school? Because I know that we have classes on the Holocaust and we have some social studies classes that bring up controversial topics. We have bioethics, but these are all choice-based classes, and the kids that tend to take them are the kids that already tend to look at different perspectives and think more widely about things. And it doesn't seem to be going away. We still have these incidents with swastikas and everything that we just talked about with, the Black students at the lockdown. I think the SEED program is amazing as well. I mean, that was one of the most life-changing professional development opportunities that I've participated in, and I think it's amazing, but it has to extend to the kids, and I feel like it has to extend faster than it's extending. So I'm just curious about those things. Sorry, that's a big question.
I mean, I just work at the junior high, so I can only speak to that piece. And, I do have still a student at the high school, but at the junior high, we are currently running a gray block class. We're running 2 next trimester and the following trimester. So it is work that we are trying to get out there and have kids, it is choice-based, so kids are opting into it. So that's something we'll continue to think about. You're going to hear more later about culturally responsive teacher leaders, but I know people are trying to embed topics throughout the curriculum, which is probably a faster way to see an impact with kids than the choice-based classes.
Evelyn, and then I'm going to keep it moving.
Sure, thank you, Kyra. So my question is, are there teachers of color that are part of the SEED training or that participate? Because I recall when I joined the school committee about 3 years ago, I believe, Maureen, you were one of the folks that came to train us with Betty Baker, and I asked the same question. And I see you and someone else that is not of color coming to talk to us about SEED training, and I think there's some kind of power in the people that have lived experiences talking about this issue, which I haven't seen in my 3 years being on the school committee, or close to 3 years being on the school committee. So I'm just curious, do we have teachers or staff of color that participate in this?
Yes, I mean, there was, so we sent, I think, 9 educators to go to see New Leaders Week this past summer, and at least half of them were teachers of color. Maybe you have the exact 4 or 5 of them. It's correct, and actually the other piece that, what is this? Okay. And the other piece to add to that is when we actually are working together for some of our sessions that we do so that we can have affinity groups within the participants so that we can have enough participants that can divide into affinity groups that they identify with. So yes, we do have C leaders, including myself, that went this summer that are BIPOC, and we are also trying to create affinity spaces within those seed sessions for participants. And so we're working together with 2 different sessions to see if there's enough that we can create those groupings.
So is there a reason why we haven't seen those BIPOC teachers or staff that are associated with the seed training here talking to us? Because in any time that we've talked about seed at this committee, we have not had a person of color.
They're brand new this year. Yeah. I mean, we have 4 new seed leaders that are out there running seminars. They're just brand new, so we have a little more comfort level. And in all transparency, I also asked and said who would volunteer for tonight's presentation. But that's noted that next time we can have people of color.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Who's next?
That would be me. So I'm going, the section we're going to talk about right now is culture responsive teacher leaders. Deb is a culture responsive educator, but she's not one of the leaders. Just to note that it is a brand new implementation this year. It was visioned last year to include this leadership model in our district, and this year is the first implementation. So we're just in the beginning of this story and this journey. So I'm here speaking on behalf, and then hopefully in the future, once we get up and running with the professional learning that we'll be doing with them and the work that they're going to be doing in the schools, they'll be here also speaking about their experiences. So the first thing I want to start with, before we get into the distributive leadership model, I want to talk about what is culture responsive teaching. And it's important that we start with a common definition. And this definition is actually from Zaretta Hammond, and her book is Culture Responsive Teaching and the Brain. And this is the professional learning book study session, and this is the book that we'll be using for culture responsive teacher leaders. I'm not going to take a moment to read. You can, there's a lot of words up there, so you can take a moment to read yourself. There are some, you can see bolded words, and I want to highlight some of those. So what exactly, when you look and you see it says teaching moves, so what does that look like in a classroom? So in a classroom, what you can see is that we're tapping into students' cultural frames and their learning tools. And what does that mean? That means their identities and their lived experiences that they have, that they bring to the classroom every day. They say you walk into the classroom with 50% of your culture and identity every single day. So that means that we have to consider what the children are bringing into the classrooms. So for instance, if you come from a collectivist culture, which I do, for me, storytelling and song are a really important part of the way that I socialize and I learn. So as a teacher, you would think about how am I tapping into those lived experiences and cultural norms, and how am I putting that into the classroom? Another big piece or a teaching move that we consider is that relationship building. It's critical for connection. Connection is really an on-ramp into engaging students in the classroom. Community of learners is another teaching move. Like, how do I create a community where we can collaborate and have those connections? So that's not a curriculum, that's a move that you do in order to have a responsive classroom. And when we talk about responsive, we talk about that educators can mirror those, the way that their students learn, and that they incorporate that into their instruction every day. So I wanted to make sure that we had sort of a little context as to when we talk about culture responsive teaching, what that means. And we'll move now into the leadership model. So I was not here when this was visioned, but I'm now currently implementing it. So culture responsive teacher leadership came out of it's an outcome of a culture responsive practice district goal to expand the leadership and have that distributive leadership. Last year, 38 educators were interviewed to be part of this new initiative in the district. We currently have 32 across the district, and it ranges between 2 to 5 within each school. And the role overview. So I want to talk a little bit about, like, what does it mean to be a culture responsive teacher leader? I shorten it by calling them CRTLs because it's a real mouthful every time I say that. So they're supporting the school administration. So if there's a DEI related goal, or if there's some work that they want to work through together, that's something the culture responsive teacher leaders can support the building administration. They also are building their own capacity as learners. So in the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the professional learning that's going to be happening for these teacher leaders through the work that we're doing with Leadership Academy and myself as a co-facilitator. And then once they've sort of grown that capacity for their own learning, then they're also going to be providing professional development in their buildings, depending on what the school administration, the school principals would like to see. The other piece of it too is that this is a constant way to make sure that you can be a thought partner for your colleague. So if, you know, Maureen mentioned a little bit about being a seed leader, how someone came up to them and mentioned something. It's the same thing for culture responsive teacher leaders. If you're thinking about something, you're saying, do you think that's something that I should do in my classroom? These are the leaders in the building that can say, yeah, let's talk a little bit more about this. I'd like to support you in that work. So that's just a general understanding of some of the things that they'll be doing. And then wanted to talk a little bit about the professional learning. So for the next 10 months, we're going to be, Michelle Shannon and I from Leadership Academy will be co-facilitating a book study session. And it is based on the book, as I mentioned, Zaretta Hammond's Culture Responsive Teaching in the Brain. And we have an arc of learning of the different chapters that we'll be working with them. Once they have a little bit more of a foundational knowledge of that work, that's the information that then they will be sharing in their buildings. So that's how you see that distributive leadership and learning. The other piece of it is that I also meet with them periodically. I already had our first meeting in August, and we talk about some problems of practice, but we also talk about what are some of the things that we want to move forward in this district that are not just school-based, but also can be district-wide that we can do. As mentioned, they're going to be responsible for school-based professional learning in their schools themselves. And the other piece that is not connected with culture responsive teacher leaders, but I wanted to highlight because it is part of culture responsive practices, is that we just had our first presentation with Safe Schools, which is part of DESE, and we had a presenter come and speak to our district leadership team about gender inclusive curriculum and practices in our schools. And in January, we're going to have 2 additional presenters come and speak to all the elementary staff. So that's also part of the professional learning journey that we have for this year. Questions? Comments?
Hi, Adam.
Thank you. All right. I think I need a little more scaffolding here because I know we're building up to something. Can you more obviously make for me the connection between the seed work that we've done and having seed leaders leading into the culturally responsive teacher leaders? Because I feel like we're building to something, but I want to be hit over the head with it.
It's a great question, and it's asked often. And it's actually asked of leaders themselves. There is an intersectionality that we have to note, right? So we're working around making sure that we're a culture responsive school. So I say, if a teacher comes up to you and they're asking something that occurred at a SEED seminar and you're a culture responsive teacher leader, you're not going to say, oh, no, I only do SEED. Everyone is learning how to become a culture responsive educator. So SEED is very specific in the sense that they're SEED leaders. So they are the ones facilitating SEED sessions. And you have to be trained from the National SEED Project in order to do that. And you can also be a thought partner in the schools. And in fact, very often in the schools, SEED leaders and CRTLs are working together to produce different documents for the schools or supporting teachers or principals as well. Culture responsive teacher leaders have a little different training, if you want to say that. So the book study is sort of going to be their training, and that's going to be very much a year-long process that we're going to be doing with them. And they're also supporting any sort of cultural responsive practices in the thought partner way. So if someone comes up to them and says, I'm really struggling with this book, I don't know if it's culture responsive to use this book, what do you think? That's a great example of something that we can work on together. And also you can bring in a SEED leader for that, because SEED really talks about race and privilege and oppression. So they're also educators that have that foundational knowledge. So they can work together, and there's a clear intersectionality, but there is the differences of you have to be a SEED trained leader from the National SEED Project.
A quick follow-up. So I think I understand it from the leader perspective. I guess my question is, as a practitioner, as a teacher in a school, why do I do one? Why do I interact with one versus the other? What do I get out of one versus the other?
What I'm seeing, and possibly Maureen, you can add a little bit more about SEED. What I'm seeing with SEED is that once you've taken a SEED seminar, it's a very introspective process. It's very much transformative. I think Tessa talked about this earlier. It's very transformative for yourself. So I think SEED is a little bit more intrinsic. And I know, like, I had recently someone follow up with me from one of our sessions and say, can we talk a little bit more about that? I've never really thought about that ism, and I don't want to share specifics. And so that's one way that I think is a little bit different than culture responsive teacher leaders, which is such a broad topic. For instance, one of the things that we're working with culture responsive teacher leaders is supporting the different holidays and acknowledgements that we're having through the school year. So they're sharing that information with their school staff around, if you're going to talk about Veterans Day, let's talk about what it means, what's the historical background, what's the educator, how are you building the educator's knowledge on that. Here's some vetted resources that you can use that are appropriate and culturally responsive. So that's one example of what culture responsive teacher leaders are doing, but SEED leaders are not doing that.
Thank you.
Hi, Rebecca.
Hello. I guess I have one nitpicky thing, which is, I understand you guys didn't come up with the name for this. I'm wondering why it's not culturally inclusive and instead is culturally responsive, as in we're responding to other cultures being here now, which is kind of a weird way of looking at it. But my other point I wanted to make is we do not have a culturally inclusive school menu. It's a lot of chicken nuggets, pizza, stuff like that, and I can't imagine anything more soothing and welcoming and familiar than seeing foods that you enjoy at home.
Other committee members? Thank you. Mr. Hi,
I have a very quick comment, which is, if you've been following the AB Food Services social media accounts, they have been highlighting culturally responsive food options in regards to Diwali, and there have been a couple other options that have been presented to students.
So I think that today they did, I'm going to mispronounce it, Dias de Muertes?
Dia de los Muertos.
They did that today. So that was, I saw that. So shout out to Food Services for that. Okay, so I'm cool with public comment. I'm going to give it 1 minute per person. Okay.
As someone who eats the school lunches, I bring my own lunch lots of the time, but I eat the school lunches sometimes. And what I've noticed from the food that's meant to be more diverse is it is like always worse than the food that is just basic, like chicken nuggets. And I think that is because we don't have people making the food who really know what they're doing with that food. And also, this isn't really about culture, but I'm lactose intolerant, and there are often no main lunch options for lactose intolerant people, for gluten-free people, for meat-free people. It's very, you have to be like a certain sort of type person with no dietary restrictions to be able to eat the main lunch. And if you don't eat the main lunch, then you have to pay for a different lunch. And some people have to do that because they have dietary restrictions that make it so they can't eat the main lunch.
Thank you. Mr. Ballard, 1 minute.
Okay, I think I got it. Oh, so sorry about that. Is my minute up? Yeah, so a question about this. This also, like, I want to echo my own comments about the top-down approach and the teaching of teachers to teach other teachers. And it doesn't work with cultural responsive stuff when the people who are the experts are the ones at the bottom. And and I have the Leadership Academy an article that seems more appropriate if we're not going to do something else. A Principal's Guide to Leading in the Time of Change, Effective and Equitable Family Engagement Strategies and Resources. One important lesson from this pandemic is how much schools need more equitable practices to support all parents as partners in learning in and outside of the classroom. Now more than ever, we must build on the momentum to foster and sustain meaningful school-home partnerships that are grounded in trust and based on a more shared and actionable understanding of student progress. For parents and teachers to be allies in this learning process, they need a shared understanding of where students are academically and developmentally so they can work together to accelerate learning. This principal guide was created to help school leaders support their teachers as they use asset-based, et cetera. What we need is more engagement between the parents who are the people who are the cultures we need to understand and their children. And, you know, teachers are overwhelmed with all these things they have to learn.
Thank you,
and you're trying to teach them. Why don't we instead learn from them? Instead, when they have professional development, that's for you to ask, how can we help you, teachers? How can we help you to engage
Thank you,
with,
Steve.
Thank you. Here, this is what you should look for. The Leadership Academy's website, that guide for engagement with
Thank you.
parents and students.
Thank you, Steve. Thank y'all. Who's next?
Thank you. So the next section is on curriculum, and when we think about curriculum, what we're talking about is the design that our educators use to plan, implement, and assess the learning outcomes for our students. And curriculum really includes 5 different components. Jen's already talked about, knowing our students and developing relationships with our students, what motivates them, what challenges they face, what's happening in their daily lives, really establishing solid, firm relationships with our students. The second piece is the instructional practices, which we've also talked about and touched on, so culturally responsive practices. I've also heard culturally sustaining practices, so that's another term that's out there as well. Inclusive practices and social emotional practices as well. So a lot of those practices cut across, and there are some strong similarities. The other piece that we need to be thinking about are the learning targets. In Massachusetts, they're the frameworks or the standards. You might also know them as learning objectives or essential questions. But where do we want our students to go? What do we want them to know, be able to do by the time they leave Acton-Boxborough? Instructional materials is another important component of curriculum. What is it that we have on hand? What resources, what programs, what tools do we have in order to instruct? And then finally, what assessments do we have for learning to know that we've met those targets? So all of that comes together in the classroom by a highly skilled professional. It's not something that we can take off the shelf. Curriculum is what happens in the classroom. Now, to the extent possible, though, we do try to write down what we can, and we'll do that through curriculum design, creating units, creating overviews, curriculum mapping, course development, and projects. And so you're going to hear a little sampling of that tonight. You'll hear an elementary social studies unit, the 7th grade civics project, and a new high school course that's been developed. You'll also learn about our school library's efforts to ensure inclusive and diverse book collections and instruction. And all of these curricular endeavors align with the recommendations of the DEI Curriculum Subcommittee that came out of the Family DEI Steering Committee last year. Those were to continue substantive K-12 curriculum work that includes the history of Indigenous and Black Americans specifically, as well as other marginalized groups, to highlight the stories and narratives of minoritized groups, and to provide a wide range of books, including those written by authors who belong to traditionally underrepresented groups. And so we, did that survey last year so that we could better understand how our families and our students feel they're represented within our curriculum. And these are a few of the examples that we're working on to work towards those goals and those recommendations. So I'd first like to introduce to you Lori Taylor. She is our Pre-K-12 Library Media Department Chair.
Thank you, Deb. Good evening. My name is Lori Taylor. I'm the
Hey, Lori, can you do me a favor? Move your microphone a little closer, please.
Yeah, sure, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Lori Taylor, Library Media Department Chair and the librarian at McCarthytown Elementary School. And tonight I'm going to talk to you about culturally responsive practice in the Acton-Boxborough school libraries. And I'm going to focus on 2 areas. library collections, and instruction. We need to have books that reflect our student population, and in addition to students seeing themselves in books, students need to have lenses into others' experiences to build empathy and understanding. In our school libraries, we need diverse book collections. And more importantly, we need inclusive book collections. I'm going to explain what the difference is. Examining our libraries for diversity alone is not enough. For example, are most of our books about Indigenous people historical? Are most of our books about Latinx characters about immigration? We need books that show representation of marginalized groups in all genres, genres like fantasy, science fiction, graphic novels, and more. And this is what inclusion looks like. How do we do this? First, we need to perform diversity audits. There are programs that are out there, Follett has one, and Diverse Book Finder, for analyzing library collections for diverse authors, subjects, and characters. We need to also look closely at our collections to ensure that they are inclusive. Our library collections need texts with diverse characters and plots across a wide variety of genres. So the next slide. Another way to build diverse collections is through acquisitions. These are some of the resources that we use as librarians to select materials for our libraries. And I won't read through all of them, but you can take a look up there. The ones on the left are publications and organizations. On the right, award-winning or award books. I want to point out that R.J. Gray has a new collection of world language books that they've just added recently. They're popular titles for independent reading in Spanish and Portuguese. And this is for multilingual learners to continue building their reading fluency in their first languages. The high school library recently purchased a wonderful database called Ethnic Diversity Source. It's a full-text database looking at culture, traditions, social treatment, and lived experiences of different ethnic groups in the United States. In our school libraries, we also need to weed books, and that allows us to have updated and accessible collection. So one thing I want to point out is weeding is not censorship. As you can see from these images, the top 3 books portray Indigenous people in a stereotypical way. The bottom 3 are recently published, written by Indigenous authors, and have received multiple awards and starred reviews. Next slide. Here are some examples of culturally responsive library instruction at McCarthytown and Blanchard School libraries. And I'm going to describe just one of these projects. I wish I had more time to go in depth about all of these and more details about each project, but time is limited. I teach a 5th grade civil rights project at McCarthytown in my school library classes. And in this unit, I incorporate both UDL and digital literacy. Using primary sources and research databases, students research people, events, movements, organizations, and legislation from the 20th century civil rights movements, including African American, women, Native American, disability, and LGBTQ rights. Students have a wide variety of digital tools to choose from to present their information. So as I said, I wish I could go in more detail. I certainly will answer questions, but I want to let you know, as the new Library Media Department Chair, I am committed to integrating culturally responsive practice into our pre-K to 12 curriculum by working with the library media specialists, with Deb, and with our wonderful curriculum coordinators. And I'm happy to answer questions now or after our next group goes.
At the end,
Sure.
We can go to the next slide. Or do I, okay. Hello, good evening. My name is Dora Sanchez. I'm the 3-6 Literacy and Social Studies Curriculum Coordinator. More. Perfect. Sorry about that. Dora Sanchez, Curriculum Coordinator for grades 3 to 6 for Literacy and Social Studies Curriculum. And I'll be sharing some curriculum work that we've been working on along with my colleague Carol, Paige Carroll, who is a Barium grades 2 to 3 educator. Next slide, please. In the Massachusetts History and Social Science Framework, Principle 2, educators are asked to incorporate diverse perspectives to value students' heritage while embracing our common ideals and shared experiences as students develop their rigorous thinking. Our social studies curriculum work shows how we are working towards this vision. For example, on this slide, there's an R&D that was designed to research culturally relevant, award-winning children's literature and pedagogy to portray the diversity of our pre-K-2 students. According to our AB Power School data, 20 other languages besides English were identified. This work included classroom teachers, ELDTs, special educators, speech and language pathologists, Sharon Ryan, my colleague, the pre-K-2 curriculum coordinator, and Dr. Erica Tulane Dawes, professor at Lesley University and the author of Text Sets in Action. The group created a list of titles, as you see here presented on up on the projector. This shows all the work that went into selecting some titles that represent about 20 home languages that are represented in our school district. This work aims to incorporate high-quality, culturally relevant literature representing cultural backgrounds in our classrooms. This can be through story walks, mapping skills, and discussing traditions associated with various cultures. Our next steps will be to create lesson guides embedded with culturally responsive practices, engaging activities that build students' identities, and opportunities for students to share their stories. Next slide.
Hi, like Dora said, my name's Paige Carroll. I'm a second grade teacher at Merriam. So this past summer, a group of educators worked on an R&D titled The Geography and Native Peoples of Massachusetts for grade 3. This also addresses the supporting questions from Massachusetts History and Social Science Framework. How did the Native peoples live in New England before Europeans arrived? The focus of this work was to create a unit of study in which students can draw attention to untold stories and narratives of Native peoples, both present and past, in Massachusetts and the New England region through multi-genre texts authored by traditionally underrepresented groups. This unit draws attention to historical representation of events that shaped our country from all perspectives and opportunities to learn about continuous contributions to our society by Indigenous groups. Students are invited to make connections to their cultures and the land around them. We've also included professional learning opportunities to build educators' background knowledge. This includes professional journals, online modules, or recordings of webinars.
This past spring, we applied for DESE's Civics Teaching and Learning Grant. We were awarded $26,563 to support grades 3 and 4 in civics education. We will partner with Primary Source to help us unpack and implement the instructional resource, Cornerstone for Civic Engagement. The units include culturally responsive and grade-appropriate sources, student materials, and content that integrates social studies and literacy instruction, all aligned to the Massachusetts History and Social Science Framework. Culturally inclusive multi-genre texts will complement this work. We are super excited to be partnering with Primary Source. They are known for supporting teachers in cultivating students' civic mindedness, cultural awareness, and global competence, preparing them for our increasingly diverse and interconnected world. Any questions for this piece?
I'm so excited because I have a McCarthytown 5th grader, so I can't wait for him to come home with a very good project about civil rights. And it's on public record that mommy has high expectations. So he's never going to see this. That's funny. Are there any questions? Friends? Hi, Evelyn, go.
I just want to thank you guys for putting together such a great list of books. I was looking at it, and I could recognize names from my home country. And I wish my kids were back in the school system to read these books, because they never had an opportunity, which is really sad. But I hope that the kids in the district will see value in these books and the names that they can pronounce from this book. So when my kid is called Songbawera, it wouldn't seem strange to people. So thank you for putting together such a great list. Thank you.
Just to second that, the way you're opening the lens for the kids in our schools is brilliant. Living in a multicultural world is difficult when you don't recognize it's multicultural, and having these skills, these tools, these building blocks at the beginning, it's incredibly refreshing and wonderful to see. So I was really happy to see that stuff. So thank you.
I just want to note that we don't usually talk about budget and all this content and curriculum at the same time, but I do think that it's important to note that decisions we've made over the last couple of years are resulting in a presentation like this. Having certified librarian leaders is incredibly important, and this is the work that they do. And I think that, allotting money for this culturally responsive teaching leads to this kind of impressive program. So thank you.
Hi, Rebecca.
I know you are talking about the elementary. Can I ask at the high school level? I remember American history. We started with Pilgrim's Landing. Are we also teaching at the high school? I have a third grader at Conan, and I have been so impressed with what he's been learning about, the Mayflower and Plymouth, and also the native peoples that were here first. I never got to learn that. Is that also happening at the high school?
So it just so happens we have the history department chair here in the audience who's going to be presenting, so I'm going to let David answer that question. Yeah.
Hi, Adam.
I just want to bounce off of what Tessa said from a budget standpoint. To see that we've got $26,000 grant for professional development is a really big deal. Being able to fund that type of work outside of our operating budget is a great way to make progress on important district goals and still giving us funds to keep the lights on in many cases. So thank you for that.
I want to just recognize Dora's efforts in securing that grant.
Thank you.
Phenomenal. Really quick question about libraries. So we know that there are the libraries, they're so beautiful and wonderful, right? And then we know that there are classroom libraries. So can you talk just a little bit about how that list will then translate into individual classrooms?
Sure. Yeah, so Deb and I have been talking extensively about this. I'll lean a little more forward. And we are planning to come up with similar to a diversity audit that I'm doing in libraries, but in a simplified form for classroom teachers to go through and look at award-winning titles, diverse titles, look and see if their classroom libraries represent the inclusion that I described tonight. And Deb and I are in the process of working on that to provide to all teachers so they can go through their classroom libraries and see if there's representation that's needed there.
All right, brilliant, y'all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Evelyn. Oh, hey.
I don't believe Rebecca's question got addressed. Are we doing this in? Oh, okay, thanks.
My name is Kat Contini. I am in my 21st year at Acton-Boxborough. I spent 17 years teaching ELA and social studies at Blanchard, and I am now in my 4th year teaching social studies at R.J. Gray.
And I am Molly Wong, and I am the junior high librarian, and I'm in my near 2nd year.
I'll get them later. They're the bane of my existence right now. I would just like to start off by saying that part of the reason I switched schools is because of the 7th grade social studies curriculum. So I was a graduate student at Leslie when I read Peggy McIntosh and I took a course on culturally responsive teaching, and I'm now the proud graduate of 2 of Maureen's seed trainings. And I love how a lot of those principles and teachings come together in our 7th grade social studies curriculum, where we do start the year with identity and values and culture, and then we build into types of prejudice and discrimination, and then it fits perfectly with our new state-mandated civics project. And so this did begin as a state mandate, and then the 4 social studies teachers last year, Mr. Zazy, Mr. Lewis, Ms. Wachelhausen, and myself, came together to figure out what we were going to have this look like for our 12 and 13-year-old students. So for our civics project, it begins with the students picking this topic of their choice. We had everything last year from book banning, LGBTQ plus rights. We did talk about, one student did do a project about bathrooms. We talked about immigration, and we talked about voter restrictions. We talked about gender equity. The students got to select a topic that was relevant and meaningful for them. And if you know a lot about what's helpful in middle school education, relevance is key. They want to know that this is something that's meaningful and important in their particular lives as well. Once they were done with their research, which was a lot of one-on-one conferencing all throughout the process, they were given the choice to create the visual and to display their learning and their information in the manner of their choosing. So there were book creators, there were posters, there were public service announcements. Unfortunately, there were no songs, there was a poem. There were posters, and so again, bringing in culturally responsive methods where students are able to present in the way that shows they're learning the best. We then have them write a piece of argument writing, and we've turned that piece of argument writing into a letter, which we did mail to local and state legislators. The challenge with that, and so I put 2022 is in the parentheses there. The challenge with that is out of the 400 some odd 7th graders, I would say we got about 10 to 15 responses to the letters that we mailed. And they took a long time to get to us. And again, if you know about middle schoolers, patience is not a virtue. And so that didn't really feel super authentic for them. And they felt like their voices actually hadn't gotten heard. Probably one of the best things we did last year, we did arrange a Zoom meeting with Senator Eldridge and Representative Sina, and they did Zoom with all of the 7th graders. And they did give them the forum to talk about some of their issues, and they responded from the state legislator point of view. So that was exciting. We did have a group of students who were doing multilingual education opportunity, and they did get to go to the State House with Mary Kay from the junior high school and meet with some representatives and talk about that as well. But besides those 2 opportunities, they didn't get really a chance to voice their topics, to voice their issues, besides with their classmates. Now, last year we did have some restrictions as far as visitors to our buildings were concerned. So this year, instead of writing letters to legislators, that will always be an option, and we do encourage it as part of our curriculum, we are going to host a civics fair. Stay tuned. Invitations will be sent out in the spring. And we hope that community members and local legislators will be able to attend, as well as parents and siblings, and give the students an authentic audience for their voice and what they would like to see changed in their community, and let them know that their voice matters and their voice can be heard. Next slide. Again, I think this came through hopefully in some of the things I was just mentioning, but again, relationships is kind of core to that seed, to that culturally responsive teaching. I did a whole dissertation on relational engagement. I could talk to you about that for a very long time if you want. But this project definitely emphasized the relationship in the classroom. Students collaborated with one another. Students collaborated with teachers. Students, with the help of teachers, emailed people who were working on their issue of choice, because they can't always get emails from outside sources. So those were emails that their social studies teachers helped them facilitate. And then there's the relationship between the student and the text, and the student and the media and the different resources that they were looking at, which is where our lovely librarian came in and helped us out, and she's going to help us out even more this year. Like Thursday, you're taking my class.
I am. So similar to what we heard in the elementary school presentations, there are obviously curriculum frameworks and skills, academic skills that we want them to be working on in this project. But sort of trying to tie those other ways of looking for other lenses as they're doing their research. Finding reliable sources is a key thing that we are all learning, is a very important skill.
skill. And middle schoolers, particularly with their broad exposure to social media and everything, are really starting to flex those muscles of choosing what is right for them. From our perspective, it is looking for, in their research topic, they come with a voice, they come with an understanding of what they know about their topic. Our job is also to help them see what voices are missing. What other voices would be important in understanding that? And it is our job to help us locate those, because they're new skills for them, and also then making sure that we are finding resources that they can access at all of the different levels. We will be building in claim, evidence, and reasoning, sort of that idea of argument, building, so that you can share a full, well-rounded project. And writing an argument paragraph is also part of it as well.
The argument paragraph writing this year is planned to take place following the civics fair. I'm a big proponent of speaking first, writing later, because the more comfortable you are in presenting this, and after you've been able to explain to your peers and your community members your topic, the better you're going to be able to write about it. And so we'll be doing the writing after the presentations this year. So a couple of, Anthony Zazie and I worked together this summer to reflect on what worked, and Molly joined us. We had an English member from the English department join us. We had several teachers on that team. We looked at what worked, what didn't work, how do we want to tweak it. And since RJ Gray has done some professional development in the UDL arena, as the district is working on that as well, that was part of our consideration this summer. What are things that we can tweak so we make sure that we are supporting all learners? And so with engagement, obviously the choice, the relevance, multiple reading levels and multiple formats for sources. That's where we're collaborating even more with Molly this year, and to make sure, last year we were kind of building the plane while we were flying it. This year the plane's kind of built, and now we're putting in the seats and the air masks and all the other good things. One-on-one conferences was essential during this project. Talking to students every day, where are you at? Family members were communicated with through email, letting them know, like, talk to your student about the topic. Like, this is obviously something that they're passionate about. Get involved with them. And we were with them every step of the way. They were the ones driving the learning. We were just facilitated. We were facilitators. And I learned a lot about some of these topics from them that I wasn't as passionate about before. I did a project alongside them, so I could model that. And my topic was about child homelessness and what a problem that is, even in Massachusetts. And so every step of the way, there was modeling of the process for them.
Why don't we stop for questions here?
This poli-sci major wants that invite, for real. Hi, questions? No questions? Really?
Was that clear? Great.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. We look forward to emails from our middle school students too.
We're planning for mid-May.
Awesome.
So.
Thank you so much.
All right, and here comes the high school team.
Welcome, y'all.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having us here tonight. I'm David Green, Department Leader of Social Studies at the high school, and I'm here with Kyra and Alec Lewis. And we're here to talk a little bit about a course that we developed last year that we are offering for the first time this year called Understanding Race. And so I'm going to have Kyra and Alec tell you about most of the substance of the course. I thought I'd speak a few moments about how we arrived at this. And of course, we're all open to any questions that you might have. In terms of how we got here, I think we have been grappling in our department with ways to help students, older students, access this incredibly complex topic in an adult way. And of course, it has, as you well know, international, national, local, and therefore highly personal dimensions to it. And so for me, it goes beyond just what you'd present in a history course. There has to be it has to have a soul. It has to have a more personal dynamic to it. There's long been a department interest and passion in this topic, but admittedly some challenges too. How do you bring kids to a topic like this authentically, especially when admittedly the majority of people facilitating it are white? So over the past few years, as you may know, we've received some student feedback around these topics. Largely based on experiences they've had in the community and in the schools. And through their activism, they've made it clear to us that the department and the school community needs to do more to address race and racism in our courses, be it our history courses, as you asked about earlier, and in a course unto itself. think we were really impressed with this activism, and in thinking about it, had an epiphany around it that activism is really a skill. And as we saw some of this raw emotion come from our young people, we realized we need to be thinking about this the way we think about writing, and the way we think about critical thinking, and the way we think about reading. Activism is a skill, and we cannot expect a 14-year-old to just know how to do that. And yet it's a pragmatic piece that we don't teach anywhere. So that became part of the conversation. How do we embrace the content need and the skill need and offer a course that will meet what students are asking for? So our process began really at the departmental level. We spent a year reflecting as a department, how could such a thing occur? What would it look like? What would the content be? Who would teach it? How could the community be involved? I spent the year reaching out to the different student affinity groups, getting feedback, looking at resources together, answering questions. Did a lot of research across districts to see how and if these topics are dealt with, and we were really surprised. There's not a lot happening. Race and racism show up in sociology courses. Sometimes there's a quarter in sort of a larger social sciences course, but no actual course on how you talk to kids about what whiteness is or what race is as a construct, nothing like that. We partnered with Primary Source, which some of you may already know is a nonprofit based in Watertown, and they do a lot of work with international education, but have also been doing a lot of DEI work and work with DESE as of late. We worked with them primarily for resource curation, but also to talk about pedagogy. How does one actually go about facilitating discussions with kids about this? And we also created a student advisory group. So this group was with us really from the beginning. We worked with them at first to hash out a general framework for the course. What would you like to see in this course you have asked us to teach? And also, we've then since then shown them lesson plans, assessment ideas. We've had them work with us to create some of the projects that they would do, and some ideas around how to work with the community. And we continued the work this past summer with an R&D. The two people teaching it are sitting here with me, two wonderful, wonderful educators, Kyra and Alec, who I will have speak on their behalfs.
So again, I'm Ravindran. I've been teaching at the high school for 22 years. So this class, I was really excited to teach this because I've thought for a long time this is a class we need to have, very specifically about race. It's a semester class. It's an elective for sophomores, juniors, and seniors. There's an option for students to get honors credit for this course, and that involves reading a book of their choosing. And we have a really lovely curated list, and the students, I think, Alec can chime in on this, who did a really nice job of choosing books that were out of their comfort level, which is what we asked them to do. We asked them to think about choosing a book that was really going to challenge their thinking. And we have a nice collection of students in grades 10, 11, and 12. So we do not have tons of seniors. We have sort of a nice, almost relatively even mix, I would say, of students of all different grades. And about half of those students are students of color. So we spent the beginning of the year, we spent a lot of time talking about how do you get kids to talk about a topic that they have probably historically been told not to talk about or comment on. And so that meant that we had to think about ways to really get them to connect with each other and build community. And so we spent a long time on community building, and that has been probably the most successful thing we have done this year, because it is a really bonded, connected class, and they really enjoy each other. We already have seen a lot of kids become friends who never knew each other before, and so that's been a really powerful experience for us, because I feel like they're in a place now where they really want to absorb this difficult information and these difficult topics and talk about them deeply. So we spent a lot of time working on that. We spent some time looking at the changing demographics of the towns of Acton-Boxborough, and what that means about how education is delivered, how we address issues of race that come up in the communities, whether it's elementary school or in the high school. And now we are at a point where we are jumping in on sort of our very first big project, and we're just about done with that project. So the major thing that we're thinking about, we thought a lot about doing is really focusing on where stereotyping comes from, particularly racial stereotyping. So we spent some time looking at what stereotypes are. We spent a lot of time thinking about what portions of our own identity do we feel connected to, particularly relating to race. And now we're asking them, and we've explored how race has been created, so what that looks like, historically, politically, legally, scientifically, and debunking some myths. And then this project they're working on right now is called Myth and Race, and so they're exploring a racial stereotype, a racial myth, and the history of that myth, and how it was created, for what purpose it served, and then how it sort of shows up in the curriculum, shows up in the world that they live in now, and how it informs stereotypes about groups of people. And it's been really, really interesting to watch them learn about these topics, because they are things that they have said, all of them have said, I've never talked about this in any other class. This is the first time I've really had a chance to talk about race deeply and to ask questions deeply about race that I have felt uncomfortable talking about or asking before. So that has been really, for me personally, but I think also Alec, very meaningful to be able to create a class where students feel, A, comfortable talking about race, and then engaging in conversations about it that are meaningful and are asking them to change.
So my name is Alec Lewis. It's my 13th year teaching in the district in the social studies department. Going off of what Karan was saying, so right now we're wrapping up the racial myths part, and they're doing their project. After that, we're going to look at case studies in American history specifically, and our goal is going to be to try to trace how these myths affect big flashpoint moments in American history. And then also, at the same time, we're going to cover a lot about systemic racism and show how the systems create a lot of the underpinnings for flashpoint events, but then how the myths really rise up to the top and are what are often catalysts for big events. So that's the framework we came up with in our R&D, and through the committee was actually really great in helping us order all of this. They were really honest about what they thought students would be most comfortable with first, and then how to spin it so that students could really dig in and engage without shutting down, but also challenge themselves. So that, I thought that was great. We are then going to ask them to present case studies. We have a nice list that Primary Source helped us with, and we're going to challenge them, because voice matters. How do you tell these really hard stories? What perspectives do you include? What perspectives have been forgotten or buried, as we'll see in some of the case studies. So that's that unit, and then we finish up with the community project. The committee, and I think we all felt it was really important to make sure we ended on the local and to have students dig into something in the community that they felt was important to them, and then produce a product on it. And I should say, all the products, we've really given a lot of options for it. We have a new resource, a makerspace, where we've been having them do different more visual presentations. There's a lot of still research skills. That's been really great about the course so far. Progress so far, we've gotten really positive feedback, and I think, as Karan said, the students seem to, something's happening, that they're bonding in a way that this is more than just a regular class. It feels like that. We have gotten that feedback from parents on back to school night as well, and from several administrators, so that's been really nice. We're hoping to continue. It's still our first semester, but we're really glad to be doing it, and we think it's really important work.
Wow. Questions? Somebody's got to have a question.
Well, it answered my question about what I asked before. I just wish everybody could take it.
I will say that when you made that comment, I thought that is exactly the kind of thing that we're hoping that students will get on, right? That the things that are happening in the community that bother them, that are related to race, that those are the kinds of things that we'll research and really think deeply about. So that is exactly what we hope to happen. Yeah.
Yes, I know. How best can I
can just be loud.
Booyah,
Can
go.
you hear me? I teach middle school. So my question, I guess, would be, and maybe this is Deb for you. So 7th graders are working on social justice, civics engagement. We talk about some of those flashpoints in history. I bet some of the ones that you bring up, maybe some of the ones that we've discussed in 7th grade. And then Dora talking about civic engagement with 6th
civic engagement teaching about race looks like elementary, middle school, high school.
I think once the civics, the cornerstones for civics, the primary source work with DESI, once we can really get our hands on that and understand that a little bit better, starting in the elementary and then working our way through would be a really, really important piece to do. Yep.
Hi, Adam.
Thanks. So David, you mentioned sort of in your intro a lot of the impetus for this class was around some of the activism that we saw in our students. So I'm curious how that's gotten rolled into this course and what type of support and encouragement that's been given to the students around activism.
So I'll give you my quick perspective, but I think you might be better off answering this. So I think in complete transparency, when we initially started to get some student feedback, it was in the form of some fairly kind of raw emotional feedback that came directly to me. And so the question was, how can we kind of address this in a way that feels productive to students so that it isn't just venting emotions and that's where it ends? Like, how can we actually show that we're delivering on this? And so I think to the questions that came up a little earlier about history, I feel like you're a little bit limited in a history class because you're still bound to the events that have occurred in the past. And for these kids, it was a lot of like, what is the school doing to think about what is happening now and what is happening in this community? There doesn't seem to be an academic setting in which that can be discussed. And so I would say that's maybe a generic answer to your question, but I think maybe Kyra and Alec might be able to flesh that out a little bit. Is that an okay start? Yeah, okay.
I think one of the ways that I position this, I do this in every history class, is that we didn't get here just randomly. We didn't just get plucked down to this way of living. Like, this has been built up over many centuries of ways in which people have developed. So I think that's, the history piece is so important to get to where we are now. So that's why we're backtracking and really focusing on how did we get to this point where we have these issues of racism now. Where did that begin and how did that develop? I think the second part of that question is, though, and this was something that I spoke at length with David about, and we argued a lot about it, and that is that I deeply believe in activism, but I also believe that it's important that students learn information and think deeply and critically, and that is our job as educators, is to really develop that knowledge and critical thinking, being an intent listener to people of different perspectives and listening to learned experience. And if activism comes out of that, wonderful. I sincerely hope that's true, but I don't want to make an activist. I really want to make really deep thinkers, people who listen to all perspectives and think carefully about what comes out of their mouth, right? And really just, and I think that's what we've been working really hard on. And I think those things will naturally evolve. I really do believe that.
One thing I just wanted to add about that is that the committee we worked with of students said that they wanted to lead with that sentiment that Karan just shared and not the activist sentiment first, because they said we want anyone to be in this class, and we have a lot of students in the class that are learning to talk about race. So I think it's a building block, but I think that a lot of the people in that committee, I think, were activists and considered themselves activists, and they very strongly felt that the course should not actually lead with that, because they wanted the impact of the course to be very wide and to draw as many people as possible.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. So are there similar classes that are unleveled? And the reason why I ask is because, Mr. Green, I know you taught a class on genocide that my daughter Kabura took, but that was an honors level class, I believe, at the time. And I heard from other parents how they would have loved for their kids to be able to have the opportunity to take the class. So I don't know if that class got unleveled to allow other folks to be able to take the course, but these are important topics that we need to be able to open up to a wider group of kids, rather than, and I like the way that you structured this race class where a kid could take it as an honors class, but they have to do like a little bit more work.
So I just want to make sure I understand your question. You're speaking to just making sure that the class is accessible to all students. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yes, but are they similar classes? For instance, the genocide class, I did similar classes that are on level, but I just used the genocide class, which I believe was an honors level class.
Okay.
Is that now open?
So I can speak to that for the genocide class and for this class. There's an unleveled option, and then within the same class, there's an option to receive honors credit if students do additional work. And our reason for that is just pragmatic, is that right now we have weighted GPA. And what we recognized is that if we do not offer an honors option, and this is purely pragmatic, to be transparent with you, we were concerned that students would opt to take leveled electives rather than this course simply for reasons of GPA. And we really grappled with this because honestly, philosophically, it didn't feel wonderful to feel like we had to put an honors option in this. But to your point, Ms. McKinley, earlier, we want as many people taking this course as possible. So that is the reason why we set the genocide course up that way. And by the way, when we did that, the number of kids who enrolled in that course went up quite a bit. And then with understanding race, what is the breakdown right now? Our kids are doing both at this point? Okay, so kids are doing both. So the idea is to move forward with it being as accessible as possible.
And that's exactly my point, that we make it more accessible. So thank you for that.
Okay, I'm going to say thank you. Thank you to all of the educators who have been here this evening. Thank you for all of your presentations and all of the great work that you're doing. And thank you for staying so late. Oh, we do?
Yeah.
Oh,
One more.
I'm so sorry, y'all. Hey.
Maybe we should have started with the Welcome Center as like our ending. But we're ending with it.
So sorry about that. Hi, welcome. Hello.
Hi, so my name is Marianne Young. I am the multilingual education coordinator for the district. And Jennifer and I are going to talk about the Welcome Center that we have been working on, which is really exciting. So currently, we have a substantial increase in new families, many of which are multilingual in the district. We currently have 325 multilingual learners in our program this year from all different countries, all different demographics, all different economic statuses. And as a result of that, we started to see a need for more support navigating the culture of school, navigating the registration process, navigating communication and norms. And so we decided to look into creating a Welcome Center as a culturally responsible or inclusive way to welcome all families into the district while honoring their experiences, languages, and the culture that they bring. So we started with creating a vision, which is to develop a central location for new and existing families to streamline the registration process, to gather helpful information about services that the district offers, and to be a link between community partnerships and resources that might be available to families. So as we begin, we have started with researching best practices. So Jennifer and I have traveled to a couple of districts that have great functioning welcome centers already created. So we have been to Lynn and Framingham. We have also engaged and participated in a retreat with directors of family engagement for different districts because we know that family participation is going to be critical to running a well-functioning welcome center. And then I also just went last Friday to a DESE-run conference about, it was a Better Together Summit, which again focuses on ways to bring and connect school communities with family communities. And I also just want to emphasize that this is for new families, but not just immigrant families, all new families to the town and district. And also, we are hoping to extend services to those that are already enrolled in the district that might have a need for some of the supports that we provide. And you're probably wondering why we've included this within the culture responsive practices information. It's because the first minute that families enter a welcome center, it's the first minute of their story at AB, and it's their first impression. So it's critical to make sure that we are being inclusive of all families and making sure that we honor everything that they bring to this community, and that's a way for us to be able to engage with them immediately. So I know it's getting later in the night, so I will speak as fast as I can. What part of the planning process is that we've created both a steering committee and an advisory committee. The steering committee is composed of central office administrators, Mary Ann, myself, the superintendent, director of special projects, as well as the coordinator for mental health and behavioral services for our district. And then what we've decided to do is create an advisory committee that's composed of several stakeholders that would really be integrated into a welcome center. We already had our first meeting a couple weeks ago to talk about our why and why we're doing this, talking about what we should name it. There's welcome centers, there's family resource centers, so we've been working on that. And then also talking about that we're going to be dividing the work, so we're going to work smarter, and we're going to be dividing the work and having some subcommittees. These are the 4 subcommittees, and Mary Ann will talk a little bit more about what the subcommittees will entail.
So our first subcommittee is going to be about staffing, and we're hoping that this subcommittee will look at ways to fund any new positions that we might need, if there are any grant opportunities, if there are any positions that we can reallocate, staffing to the Welcome Center, and look at all possible funding sources. We also would like to have another committee looking at facilities. So we have an area in mind at the front of this building that we're thinking of for a Welcome Center, but we need someone or the subcommittee to look at what changes might need to be made, if there's any renovations that might need to be necessary, and to investigate whether the space works as we hope it would for a Welcome Center. We are also going to have another subcommittee looking at community partnerships to see what resources are already out there in Acton and Boxborough and the surrounding towns that we can build relationships with and offer direct connection between our families and those agencies. And then one of the last things that we would like a subcommittee to look into are services that can be provided. So some examples of services that a Welcome Center might be able to provide are translation, interpretation, registration, language proficiency testing, social workers, connections with nurses and health. So these are the things that we're building towards as we move on to the next stages in this work. Any questions?
Any questions, y'all? I know that these are in the early stages, but they're very good.
We're in the planning phases of
Hi, Adam.
So I think you mentioned a bit, community partnerships. I think it would be really great to reach out as early as possible to the 2 towns, because it feels like there's a pretty strong intersectionality between the work that the towns do in welcoming new residents to what we're talking about here. And then the other one that I was thinking of would be looking to see if there's grants. This feels like something that's ripe for a grant of some sort from the state in terms of creating welcome centers.
He's going to do it.
I'll just comment on that second half of that, Adam, because we've started that process already. I actually talked to, one of our state legislators about possibility of looking at an earmark through the budget process for something like this. I think there's going to be one-time startup costs that are associated with especially getting the facility accessible and ready for families and, configuring it the way we need. That would be a great opportunity for an earmark. So if the committee is interested in some advocacy work on that, I would, suggest maybe reaching out to state legislators on this.
I also
or maybe
just
our
learned,
7th graders.
I learned on Friday there's also a new grant that's going to be released in January. So we're looking at all of those opportunities too.
I just have a different perspective on this now because I'm a 2nd grade educator in Clinton, where there's a huge EL population, and I just can't emphasize the importance of this. I think that, in Acton, when I graduated, it was like 98% white. And so it's a huge difference in how important this is, not only for the students and the families, but for their success in schools, because I imagine that, when they're given the tools and things like that, it helps the educators as well. I mean, I often find myself just flummoxed as to how to best communicate with families that may speak a different language or have a totally different, perspective and landing in school. So, bravo.
Thank you.
Thank you all. This is wonderful. All right, so thank you to all the educators and everybody who came and everybody who presented. Thank you so very much.
Thank you all very, very much for coming tonight,
And
the
staying.
incredible work that you're doing and being able to share that with the committee, so thank you.
Okay, friends, this is what we're going to do. We're going to switch to budget. I'm going to let this room clear out. We're going to do a very hard 5-minute break, and then we're going to come right back here, okay? Okay, we're all here. So we're going to come back from this break. Thank you, everybody, for your patience and for letting us go through that. I realize it's late, so I want to keep it moving. Mr. Verdolino is going to give us a financial update on the first quarter. Ready, go.
And just to set expectations, this is going to be a vastly inferior presentation to what you all just witnessed. But be that as it may. Okay. So this is, I've entitled this Discussion Points. This time I think you did get the memo and report submitted electronically. So this is a very brief highlight of what you've received. This is through the first quarter, the projections for where we'll be with revenues and expenditures at the end of the year. So this is not our gain, so to speak. This is not a net income statement for the first quarter, but it's where we think we'll be at the end of the year. Expenditures is just too early to project anything 9 months further out. And so we're about $300,000 projected to the good on the revenue side. As you would read in the memo, that's probably on the conservative side, given some things that are happening, including if you read tomorrow that the Fed raises interest rates another 3/4 of a point or possibly less, we should continue to do better with interest income, significantly so. So I've identified the details of that $314,000 variance in the report, and again, too soon to tell on expenditures. And there's where I think we're going to be with E&D, right at $3 million and just under 3% at this point. The next three slides are reminders. I presented all of them in the last presentation, but they're here for in case there are, they're here for reference in case there are discussions on this. So here's our E&D history. I won't go over what each of the bars means, but you can see that we're a little bit on the downside compared to where we were, but still relatively robust in my opinion. We talked in the last meeting about a possible budget starting point for E&D usage. We turned back about $1 million, $1.1 million in FY22, excuse me. And so the plan is to present that as the starting point for E&D usage for the FY24 budget. We had a meeting with members of the Acton FinCom. We discussed in general terms a plan like this. I think we agreed that E&D usage certainly can't be zero. We'd like it to be less than 1.5 million, but getting it to 1.1 might prove to be rather challenging. And a reminder that special programs collectively are in much better shape than they were following 2 years of pandemic. And just for what that's worth, that I don't think there's the need to bail out, if you will, our special programs. And so I think I've said this a few times already. It's very early in the process, both for FY23's actual results and FY24's budget development.
Hi, Adam.
I have one quick question in relation to the budget positive variance that you're predicting at this time of the 314,000. How does that compare to our previous predictions at this point, previous years? And does it have any correlation?
About the same from the standpoint of, I try to be conservative. I try to make sure that that number is not too high, but the pieces are different from year to year. So half of that is the fact that in FY23, the state awarded $60 minimum aid per student instead of $30. That's $150,000 to us, or about half of that. And the rest of it is interest income, largely interest income, which we didn't have a positive variance for the last 2 years.
Hi, Evelyn.
So are you saying that we did not have a positive variance the last 2 years after Q1? Is that what you're saying?
This is what I'm projecting at year end. Revenues will be $300,000 more than budget. And stay tuned that the number grows during the year.
Positively?
Positively. The variance grows, yes.
Okay, that's good news.
Because of the rates. The rates have been historically low. We all got all that part.
Right.
Okay.
Revenue sources, the assessments are locked in. There's no variance there. The Chapter 70 is locked in at $150,000 to the good. Charter aid, transportation aid, we don't know those until June. We get half the amount in December and the other half in June for transportation. The only other variables are Medicaid reimbursement, which we're doing a little better than the budget. We had brought that down, and interest income we had brought down significantly, and we're exceeding that significantly.
Hi, Eben.
Some simple questions. So the difference between the budgeted revenue and the budgeted expenditure is that's 1.8 million. That's basically comes out of E&D and the CIP stabilization fund?
Correct.
Okay. So that's okay. That's great. Another question is the TBD for the projected expenditure. So looking at the positive side on the revenue side, that's great, right? But although I saw this TBD, but I just wonder what is the sense of, if that's on the safe side or on the... Negative.
don't have enough information. I typically don't give you a projection until the second quarter report.
Hi, Marie.
I'll just add a little bit to that. I mean, so what Dave is showing is we know the revenues that we've been told are coming in, and expenditures say TBD, and it's very early in the year. The biggest part of our budget is personnel. This is part of the memo. I think early on, it's October. We think we're close to balanced with personnel. We know that we had some additional students who needed some additional support, so we have hired some additional special education assistants. We've also kept 3 or 4 positions vacant on purpose, as we knew we got to the end of the year and that we were coming into a really tough budget year. Those things are semi-balancing out as far as we can tell so far. There will be some expenditure savings by the end when all is said and done. So he's not saying I'm projecting 300 for the end of the year. He's saying this is what we know about so far. So just want to, in terms of hiring, I think we're okay, but we're not great and we're not terrible. Those were accounting terms, by the way.
Great and terrible, yeah.
Okay, I think we're keeping it moving. Oh, yeah, good, we're good. Thank you, Dave. Hi, Adam.
Hi. Ooh, this is a new perspective on our committee. All right, I am going to talk us through budget guidelines from the Budget Subcommittee. Raise the mic. It's surprisingly loud behind you when you sit here now, I can say that. So I'm actually gonna switch this around a little bit. I'm gonna sort of rehash a bit of the presentation that we did at the town leadership meeting last week, because I think it's an important thing for us to, as a committee, to look at. So I'm going to start with some of the numbers parts first, particularly around how we get to assessment and budget numbers, because I think that will then inform some of the discussion that we want to have around the budget guidelines. So let's see here. I think I want to go to this slide. No, this one. Okay. Really, I found this a really helpful thing to understand about how we get to an assessment from our budget, or how we get to a budget from an assessment, particularly as we look this year at some of the constraints that we have on the town side for increases. So as a point of reference, and I'm going to go through this relatively quickly because I know we're already long, so just give me big wide eyes if you want me to slow down. We're looking at last year's FY23. Our budget increase last year was 3.2%. The way we funded that then was an increase in our use of revenues, or an increase in the use of reserves and an increase in revenues that we had projected. So you see a positive increase in those non-assessment sources. To get to the balance of our budget, we assess the towns. So we take our budget increase, and that was $3.2 million. We minus out the revenues that we were projecting, and then that in turn leads to an assessment to the towns of 3.4%. So the numbers that you want to look at here are the budget and the assessment numbers. So we had a budget increase of 3.2%. Jointly to the towns, it was a 3.4% assessment increase, and then based on our formulas for making assessments over to the towns, Acton saw a 3.2% increase to their assessment. Boxborough saw a 4.6% increase to their assessment. So this is what happened for last year. Great, getting some nods. When we look at FY24, if we start with a budget increase, and let's say we're gonna, again, and these are hypothetical numbers, come in with a 3.2% budget increase. So that's an increase for us. Dave already talked a little bit about this. We know we're gonna get more revenue from the state, modest amount of additional state aid. As a starting point, we're talking about using less reserves for next year, which is why that's a negative number. So the increase that we have to our budget from the non-assessment sources is actually a decrease. It's down 1.5%. So again, if we take our hypothetical budget increase and we minus out the revenues, the assessment to the towns, plural, goes up to 4.3%. So you can see how what we might say is a quote-unquote modest budget increase of 3.2% turns into 4.3% to the towns, And then Acton will see an increase of 4%, and Boxborough would see an increase of 5.8%. So really the thing to look at here is if we're driving our budget process through an increase in our budget percent, it almost always is a much larger percentage increase to the towns. So let's flip this, right? We know that our constraint is what the towns can bear, particularly in this year. So what if we look at what we'll drive as an assessment increase to the towns? So in the previous slide, we ended up with that 4% increase to the towns. Let's say the towns can bear a 3.2% assessment increase. Again, hypothetical, maintaining consistency with that 3.2%. What does that mean? The non-assessment sources are still the same for next year. We know we get a little state aid. We're going to use less reserves. So our overall contribution of reserves and non-assessment sources is less than previous years. So that means if we take our assessment increase and we add the reserves, that monies that we're going to put towards that, the district budget can only increase by 2.3%. So you can see very quickly if we're driving our budget process by what the assessment can increase to the towns. Just to sort of complete the story here, that looks like now a 3% increase to Acton's assessment and a 4.3% to Boxborough's assessment. So if we're driving our budget process by what the towns can afford, which we kind of have to do, as we know we've got some pretty serious constraints there, it means that our budget increase is even smaller than we might start off with. I'll pause really quickly for questions on this before I take us to the next sort of step here.
I just want to repeat for the folks in the back. The number that you see, that 3.0, is what we have heard is what the town can afford. We need to hold a number in our heads for this process. Hi, Evelyn.
So the hypothetical increase of 3.2, that was the same percentage from last year, and it's reflecting the same number. Is that by coincidence, or is that the number that we're just working with?
So the number at the top is hypothetical for next year. And so we're looking at what does a 3.2% budget increase mean, and how does that relate to the assessment to the towns? Or what does a 3.2% assessment increase mean, and what does that mean to our budget?
Yeah, but the question I have is that we used the 3.2% last year. So are we just using that number hypothetically because it was a number we used last year to sort of model out to see what it would mean for us?
Exactly.
Okay.
Really what I'm just trying to show here is that relationship between our budget and the assessment to the towns, plural, and then the individual towns as we put it through the formula.
Got it. I was just curious why we're using the same number to model out. Thanks.
But for the lay folks, the assessment that we bring to the town is the number that really, that's the one that folks are really looking at. So, there is a difference between these two numbers. That's why we're going through this exercise. Hi, Rebecca.
And the 4.3% is what Boxborough said that they can do?
Oh, I think we can be very, very plain about this. Acton has a very hard financial limitation. So
I've heard that.
That number, that Acton 3%, or whatever the assessment that is delivered to Acton, is really what's going to be driving our budget process this year.
Okay, so we're just ignoring Boxborough, and they're along for the ride.
Well, I
We're
will
never
say that
ignoring
Boxborough is
Boxborough.
going to need to be wooed a little bit to.
Yeah, because of what happened at the last town meeting, right? Okay.
So, I mean, the end result is Boxborough's increase will almost always be a little bit more, and that's for a couple reasons. Primarily, we're looking at rolling averages of student enrollment, and the student enrollment is moving more towards Boxborough. But the other bottom line here is whatever we bring down to support Acton's ability to fund our operations will also bring down what Boxborough's assessment would be.
I have kind of a newbie girl question. For the revenues and reserves, are those really our only additional pots that we can be, or is there maybe another creative well that we could be drawing upon?
I'm gonna say right now, probably not. Maybe something we can discuss more in depth at a budget subcommittee, but these are the big boulders that we can adjust. There are lots of other budget drivers that we'll talk about as we work through the budget process. This is really like setting the ground to understand. And I think the last bit of information I'll share before I go on to the guidelines is when we look at fixed cost increases, there's just a few areas that come up as regular increases. So our health insurance costs, our contributions to other post-employment benefits, retirement funds, and whatever contractual obligations we have to our employees, which make up over 65% of our budget. Those are the things that go up each year that we have we have limited control over.
So if we know that Acton we have some limitations on how much Acton was willing to contribute, why are we, if you go back to your last slide, why are we then putting in less of the reserves?
That is an excellent question. Let me go through the guidelines, because that's where I want to end the discussion this evening.
Okay.
Yes, great job, Evelyn. Okay, so the Budget Subcommittee met. We came up with a list of 9, which have now sort of been revised down to 7 budget guidelines that are actual guidelines that we want the committee to review, provide us some feedback on, and then we'll bring them back to the committee as a whole to vote. And we, not only did we come up with these guidelines, but we really tried to sort of prioritize them in terms of what was most important for this year in developing a budget. So the first 3 that you'll see here, first is consider the budgetary impact of collective bargaining agreements on the district's ability to provide services for the students. The next one, to evaluate opportunities to create organizational efficiencies in order to prioritize services to students, and including those who have been disproportionately underserved. And then the third was to evaluate class sizes at all levels and budgets to the degree resources are available to maintain class sizes within the school committee guidelines. So these first 3 were really around how do we control the budget from a financial standpoint, and what does that mean in terms of our staffing, our class sizes, and making sure that we're still meeting those needs for some of those students who we've seen disproportionate outcomes for. The next 4 items are really more aligned with our goals. So the message that we have for the administration as they're building a budget is control costs, but stick to our goals. So you'll see item number, it's not 6 anymore, I haven't reordered these. The next item on the guidelines list is to ensure that students have access to a robust system of supports for their social, emotional, mental, and behavioral health needs and academic needs. So that should tie with our goals and our activities towards a multi-tiered system of supports. Continue to fund work to promote all students' sense of belonging through a strong and inclusive school climate and culture. So we saw some of that this evening already. Provide resources that continue to address the disproportionate outcomes for students who have been historically underserved by our schools. And then the last guideline is to continue a path toward tuition-free all-day K to the extent that it's economically feasible. Economically feasible. Thank you, Kyra. And I think that that's one that we'll probably have to discuss some more. There's definitely, the language in here is not continue to do it as we've been doing it, it's continue to do it as we can afford to. So with that, there were 2 other items that we wanted as a school committee to be able to provide to the administration as some real overarching guidelines. And those were these 2 items. So very, very blatant, very upfront. What do we as a school committee want to have the administration limit our budget increase to? And to Evelyn's point before, what is our target use of reserves for next year? So those are the 2, sort of as we looked at the first part of the presentation, those are the 2 driving factors that will then result in how the administration can go about building a budget for us.
So basically, we have to wait to see, I mean, from Dave's presentation this evening, if things are trending in the direction that they're trending, we may come up with a positive variance, right? So if we're looking at, I don't know, we have to wait to see how we spend this year. Then we can think about how we limit the budget to increase or whatever, and then.
So in Dave's presentation, briefly this week, but more in depth last time, he shared that on average over the past 4 or 5 years, our average turnback is $1.1 million. And so that, 1.25, thank you. We just found more money. So there's an average turnback, and in that chart that he put in the presentation this evening, you can see that turnback versus what we've been budgeting for the next year. So that's why in his presentation and his suggestion was we look at the 1.1 or the 1.25 million as what we would see as our turnback. And so if you think about that, what we turn back, if we use that again in next year's budget, our reserve monetary value remains the same, but based on our increase in budget, the percent of money that we hold in reserve would continue to go down.
But excuse my limited financial knowledge, but if we know that on a yearly basis we have 1.25 10 back, right? Why are we usually front loading it? Why are we front loading our budget only to get 10 backs to use it to offset the budget for the next year when we can probably just do maybe zero-based budgeting and just put in what we actually need for that year so that we're breaking even? Like, I have not understood why we want to have those 10 backs a year-by-year basis.
We don't typically want to have the turnbacks. In fact, I asked Dave this question at the last meeting, which was, so we come in at roughly a 1% turnback every year. And on a $100 million budget, to come in with 1%, is that a good position to be in? And the general consensus is, yeah. I mean, if we budget too tightly, then effectively what we'll have to do is, at some point towards the end of the year, have a special meeting to allocate funds out of our E&D to close the gap.
I understand that, but my point is that we have data and we can project. But it seems as though our projections are not, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have a buffer, but it seems like when we go back and look at our data over, we trend it out. We're coming back with $1 million point something every year, right? Could we then use those projections? Because there are certain things that we want to fund, right? That we often have to cut because we don't have the money to fund them. But at the end of the year, we then have a 10 back of 1.1 when programs that would benefit the district are suffering because we took them out of the budget. For instance, all day K, we took them out of the budget because we didn't have the money for it. But then we then turn around and say, okay, now we have a 1.1 million 10 back, which we're using to offset the budget for the next year. It almost seems to me as though we're not using the data we have to project, at least tightly, what we actually need to do and put in programs that will benefit the district. At least in my mind. I mean, I may be completely wrong on this.
Everybody's looking at me. When we budgeted revenues for FY23, it was in December 2021, January 2022. We budgeted minimum aid, for example. Here's one piece. We budgeted minimum aid in Chapter 70. The decision to bump that up from $30 to $60 was not voted on until possibly August of 2022. Town meeting had been over for 4 months. If I had a crystal ball to see that was going to happen, we could have had 150,000 more funds available to budget in the FY23 budget. But that $150,000, and I think we're talking semantics, Evelyn, that $150,000 would not be going back into replenishing E&D this year. The levers for using E&D are how much you're going to use and how much is replenished. If you budget your projected replenishment too tightly, you can't use E&D. It'll evaporate. You won't be restocking it from what you use from year to year. And that's where we are right now. If you recall the slide with the multicolored bars where I show the level of E&D over the years, the replenishment has been a significant replenishment in green. The green bars are the most consistent ones up there. The balance at the end of the year in gray has been a bit of a roller coaster. The downslope is fairly minimal at this point. What we've used started very little at the beginning of regionalization. It's gone up in a couple cases for special projects, and most recently in the last couple years, over $1 million to fund the budget.
I understand that, and I appreciate your answer, and I know that we need to replenish E&D, and we need to budget in a way that allows us to replenish E&D. My question is, if we go back maybe 5 years from now, right, and we trend it out, what has been our turnbacks for each budget season that we've had? And and I'm making this hypothetically, that for the last 5 years, our turnback has been $1.25 million. Let's just say for the sake of this discussion, it's been $1 million, right? That we're getting turnbacks every year for the last 5 years. It means that we don't have a problem with replenishment, right? Because we're getting money, we're budgeting in a way that we're sort of like, we have a buffer, right?
We use that $1 million
to offset the next year's budget.
Right.
Yeah, but there's another part of that, which
But
is...
the point I'm trying to make is that necessary? I'm not saying that we have to budget in a way that gets us in trouble, but do we need $1 million of turnback every year?
When you say is it necessary,
Yeah.
part of it is timing. So we set the FY23 budget before we knew the July 1, 2021 E&D. There's a lag between when we set our budget and when E&D gets certified. And by certified, that means can be used. And one other thing, there's an expression, better to be lucky than good, right?
True.
So Adam is very kind to say we're within 1% and isn't that great, but I honestly do not try to see where I'm stashing $1 million for the end of the year. Last year, we had a tremendous unforeseen gain in the program that was 2 years ago, the unemployment program related to COVID. Tremendous amount of funding that we hadn't planned on.
Expense increase is what you mean, yeah.
No, a refund from the state for our costs. And it doesn't, we'll take this argument offline. But things happen, and last year it was Medicaid unilaterally changed the rules, and we ended up with a $600,000 to the good variance that was not at all considered at the beginning of the year. So things happen, and what I think my job is to budget revenues relatively reasonably but relatively conservatively, and expenditures reasonably but relatively conservatively.
Just to go from a practical statement, and Dave can talk to the mechanics of the budget, but if we said, okay, this year we're going to budget, our goal is to try and tighten the budget to within 0.5% of the budget. We will have had, maybe an extra $500,000 this year, but we'll have a bigger $500,000 problem next year because we won't have that same level of turnback. And so now all of a sudden, the E&D balance has gone down, instead of 250,000 this year, it'll have gone down 750,000. So it's gonna, if we don't continue to try and be fairly consistent with how we budget, you're going to see the E&D reserves run out very, very quickly.
No, but Peter, that's exactly my point, right? That then when we're sitting here making those tough decisions to cut budget or to remove certain programs is the very reason why we don't want to have that additional $500,000 problem. If we are, the only reason why because we have that buffer that we use to offset the next year's budget, we are not making, I'm not articulating myself very well, but we're not making the decisions to cut the budget the way that maybe or tighten our belts the way that we should be. If we do know that we're only going to be 0.5%, it makes me feel better when I say, okay, I support this budget cut and I support that budget cut. But when I sit here and I support a budget cut only for us to have $1 million or $1.25 million back, then I'm like, why did I even make that decision? But maybe I'm looking at it in a different way. I'm not comprehending this.
So I do want to share that I've been sitting on budget for 4 years, and I'm still learning. So I think the mechanics of this is somewhat complicated. The one other piece of perspective that I want to give around the turnbacks is, and you saw that in the beginning part of the presentation, when we use money out of E&D, which is essentially money that was surplus from the previous year, we use that from E&D, and it in turn reduces the assessment for the towns. So from a perspective view, in terms of respecting our taxpayers' money, we're saying to them, you know what, we need to have this 1% buffer just in case, because we don't really know. At the end of the year, we're going to put that into our excess and deficiency and our reserve funds, and we're going to use about the same amount for the next year. So we're in turn reducing the assessment to the towns roughly in the amount that we didn't need to use this year. And I know, Evelyn, what you're discussing is maybe how do you look at reducing the budget sum so that you don't have such a big variance, and I think that's a bigger conversation. I think for the point of moving the conversation on tonight, these two numbers are the questions in terms of, does the committee want to reduce our use of E&D, so back to the 1.1, 1.2 million that we're seeing as an average turnback, or do we want to use more because we know that what the towns can afford from an assessment standpoint will severely limit our budget. So from a historical 3.5% budget increase to now a 2.2% budget increase. And do we do that knowing that we are taking more from reserves than we're putting in, which means we're continuing the downward trend of using our reserves? And then the other is, what is that number that we want to come to as a budget increase?
Okay, Tessa, and then I want a number. We actually have to, it's 9:15. Okay.
The difference in using E&D is that we're using it to reduce the assessment. We're not using it to reduce the budget. There's a difference between budget and assessment, and I know you understand that. But we can't use E&D funds to support a program. That's not what we're using it for. But at the end of the day, it's like a separate pot of money. So we can say our budget is X dollars, or it's going to increase whatever percent, and if we use E&D, it's just to reduce the assessment.
Just to be clear, my question, my concerns are not the E&D use at all. I am just concerned about that turnback.
But the turnback replaces the E&D. So
But
if you're not
all of it. Is it all of it?
Yeah.
That depends on the choices that we make in terms of our budget each year and how much.
But so our balance, though, has reduced the last couple of years. So when I was on budget, I don't know, whenever, a couple of years ago, the big discussion was, we set budget guidelines at maintaining a certain percentage of E&D. And since then, we've used bigger numbers to reduce assessments, and our balance has gone down. So the turnback isn't replacing, right? The turnback's not really replacing everything, because otherwise we'd still stay.
We use more than we turn back.
We use more than we turn back.
Okay, so that turnback then goes to replace the E&D that we use to offset the assessments of each town. That's what I did not understand. That's why I asked. So thank you for answering my question. That was where I was trying to get to. What do we use that number for?
Okay, friends, so we need two numbers. So Adam, do you have a suggestion? where would you like us to start? So I'm going to start by just saying, whatever the increase is, it's really just about the assessment. Whatever the number it is, it needs to be an Acton assessment of 3. So.
I think we have to be careful. When the Finance Committee presented the financial situation for Acton, if the town of Acton used none of its free cash, which is the equivalent of E&D, there is a 0.6% increase available. Like I said, that doesn't include their use of free cash, but that's sort of that's the number. And for those of you who sit on ALG, you're part of that discussion. So I think 3 is not realistic for this year, and I think that it would say that we've not listened to what the town of Acton is sharing with us in terms of their ability to fund.
Great. So then what is your suggestion?
My suggestion is 2.5. I think we have to start with that. And I'll share one last piece here. We're not putting these 2 numbers in as part of our voted guidelines because we know we don't have enough information now, and we don't want to hold to a specific number that we voted as a committee vote. These are directional guidelines for the district, not voted. So I'm going to say 2.5%, knowing that it's a swag, and we need to have a workshop and get some feedback from the administration about what that looks like.
Hi, Tessa.
So if our staffing budget went up, like increase, if there was 0% COLA, right? 0%, if that's what the teachers union agreed to or whatever, what would the increase to our budget look like with just, I mean, that's most of our budget. I mean, that's the thing. Like, if we have to limit to 2.5% or 3% or whatever, like, even if we gave them a 0% increase, what is that increase to our budget?
This is why you and I are not administrators, and we sit in the school committee with a bottom line budget. I don't think that information is well enough known yet, which is why I'm saying we need to come up with a number, and we need to then see the scenarios around that number. So my suggestion, and I'm happy to discuss further, would be a 2.5% budget increase, and I would actually target a higher use of E&D. I think that we're in difficult times. I don't think they're going to go away, but I think that we need to balance the needs of the students in our district with the ability of the towns to fund that. And so I think we need to show the town that we're committed to keeping up the excellent education that we provide. So I would say 1.3 million for E&D as a, again, starting point to see what the scenario looks like.
Hello, Yepin.
So before, to answer the second question, I was wondering, I remember we had a like upper bound of the E&D percent, I guess it's 5% or something. Or then, yeah, we cannot go above 5%. That's why we use big money, right? So in the past few years. So what is the lower bound? What percentage could be?
There's a policy, so the school committee has a policy to maintain between, I think, 4 and 4.5% of our operating budget inside E&D. As Dave presented, we're at 3% right now, so we're already below that. There's no legal statutory requirement for us to keep a minimum, so it's at our discretion. There is some preference and guidance from some of the town finance committees about where they'd like us to see, like us to not go below. That's an even more complicated conversation than the one we just had about E&D, so I'll leave that for the minutia later. But there's nothing that limits us from drawing that down to 0 other than, you know, fiscal prudence to not drain your savings account.
Okay, friends, so it is 9:20. Adam, what, okay, so so that's where we are, and then now we're taking this back to budget sub.
Yeah, and you know, I know this is the hardest part, but I'd also love any feedback anybody wants to send me directly around the actual guidelines. There's a memo in your packet around some of those written guidance in terms of where to look to maximize efficiency and where to focus our efforts on in terms of any reallocation of spending for the district.
Yeah, Ben.
So I thought we have a problem with the town questioned us use bigger money of E&D, right, last year? So to offset the budget, their question is about the really increase of the budget, not about the, so.
It's all part of the same formula.
Bigger use of the E&D is gonna, we still say 3% of the budget, but then we use 2 million of the E&D, that's why they criticize, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's all part of the same formula, so we could, again, what I started with was, we're really driven by the percent increase on the assessment to the town of Acton. How we get to that, either reducing our budget, using more reserves, is our decision, which is why we're providing this guidance. And to your point, Yevin, yes, we used 1.5 million of reserves last year, which was more than we turned back, and there was some commentary around using more than you're returning. My counter to that is, we were sensitive to the town's ability to fund last year's budget and our needs to provide a quality education to our students, and that's the decision we have to make.
Short question is basically, so if we feel comfortable of using the E&D to 2 million, for example, right? And if that means we can use probably 2 million, right, E&D. We are sitting at 3 million. If we feel comfortable to use to say 2 million, assuming we are going to replenish whatever something, so that means we have 2 millions. We can restore 2 millions, right, from E&D. So will that trigger override, basically? Do we have the support from the?
I'm not quite sure I understand the last part of your reasoning there. So if we use 2 million of RE&D this year, it'll draw RE&D down to 1 million.
To 2 million, right? Because we're assuming.
And then, we'll assume that it gets replenished.
Yeah,
so the
1 million.
ending balance would be at about 2
Yeah,
million.
2, right.
There's absolutely no vote required other than the vote of this committee to appropriate those funds that's required to use that.
But I got the impression we have a comment, like you said, FinCon commented about our use just too much of E&D, right? So not on the safe side. I just wondering if we use 2 million, will that also beg another criticism or
Yeah,
issues,
I mean, it's
right?
a fairly diverse body on the Acton Finance Committee, and I think that some people would recognize that we need to provide for our students, and some people would be unhappy with our level of reserves. So they're not a monolith, but yes, I think we would get criticism. And part of the challenge for us in this budget year is to balance the concern of the finance committees with the concern of our families who don't want to see drastic cuts.
Great. Okay. Adam, do you have what you need?
I believe so.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Again, anybody who wants to send feedback on the written guidelines as well, please send them to me, and we're going to revise them at the next budget subcommittee, and then at our next meeting, which is a budget workshop meeting, we'll start by voting those budget guidelines.
Yes. So there will be even more of this at our next meeting. So everybody get ready.
Can I, just for a clarification, Adam, when would you need feedback from committee members by?
That's a great question. I believe our next budget subcommittee meeting is it Monday the 7th? Yeah. So by Sunday night.
Cool.
Everyone got this Sunday.
This
right?
Sunday.
This upcoming Sunday night. Questions, comments, and concerns? Thank you, Adam. All right, everybody. Here we go. Can somebody bring up the warrants while I'm going through consent, please? Thank you so much. Items on the consent agenda do not usually require discussion and are approved with one vote unless any member would like to hold an item for discussion and a separate vote. I will read each item name, and if any member would like it held, please say hold. Members do not have to have attended a meeting to vote on the minutes. Item number 1, approval of the meeting minutes for the 20th. Item 2, approval of the joint meeting minutes from the 25th. Item number 3, donation of $4,950 to Blanchard Memorial from Littleton Electric Light and Water Department. Is there a motion to approve the consent items?
Move to approve with gratitude to the Littleton Light and Electric.
Okay, so Adam with gratitude, Ben with gratitude. All in favor? Aye. Any objections? etc. That moved unanimously. All right, here we go. Statement of warrants. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, committee reports. I was ready to go. Here we go. Negotiations Subcommittee, Amy is not here. Marie, do you want to say something about that?
Just we're actively meeting with teachers. We have exchanged proposals, and we are evaluating proposals, and we'll be back in touch with the school committee when we have more information.
Thank you, Marie. Hi, Ben.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Acton Select Board met as a body on October 17, 2022. At the meeting, there was a hearing regarding a taxi license. Moreover, during the new business portion of the meeting, the Select Board presented the FinCom's point of view for the upcoming fiscal year. The same presentation was made at the October 25th joint Acton-Boxborough Regional School District Leadership Meeting, as presented at the October 25th meeting. The FinCom indicated that the town is at risk of having its expenditures exceed its revenues, as we discussed earlier tonight. The recommendation from both the Select Board and the FinCom is to limit costs. The remainder of the meeting was largely relegated to non-binding articles to be presented at town meeting, BSA Scout items, and a consent agenda, which included but is not limited to 2 committee appointments, sale of excess property in the name of vehicles, and various other items.
Thank you so much, Ben. Here we go. Statement of warrants and recommendation to approve. Ready, go, Tessa.
I move that the school committee vote to approve the below-listed warrants totaling $4,584,254.62. AP vendor warrants as follows: 23-008A, dated 10/13/2022, in the amount of $520.50. 23-008, dated 10/13/2022, in the amount of $546,321.25. Payroll vendor warrants as follows: 23-008PR, dated 10/20/2022, in the amount of $1,182,545.20. And payroll warrants as follows: P2308, dated 10/20/2022, in the amount of $2,854,867.67.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. I think that was unanimous. Thank you so much. Mr. Superintendent, would you like to highlight anything in the FYI?
Kyra and I are holding our next community coffee on November 9th.
And that's it.
Move to adjourn.
Second. That was Adam and Tessa. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.